Good afternoon and welcome to Woodridge. We are excited to be a part of the Borscht Belt dedication. Woodridge has a rich and interesting history starting as a farming community. The landscape was not conducive to farming, so creative farm owners began to rent rooms to city dwellers as respite from the summer heat of the city. From that grew the hospitality industry that Sullivan County is so well known for. Woodridge was a progressive community and home of many cooperatives. The burgeoning hospitality industry owners, mostly Jewish, found a need for insurance services because they could not obtain insurance through regular means due to anti-Semitism. A man by the name of Philip Thomas, who happens to be a relative of the famous Boris Tomaszewski, founder and leader of the Yiddish theater, lived in Woodridge and rode the country on horseback, gathering support to solve the insurance issue. In 1911, the cooperative fire insurance companies of Sullivan and adjoining counties, now known as Associated Mutual Cooperative, was established, and the company is still operating, exists to this day, and is located on Broadway in Woodridge. The company insured the Jewish farmers and boarding house owners, and later, as the industry grew, continued to insure the boarding houses, bungalow colonies, and small hotels of the Borscht Belt. Another issue facing the Jewish owners of the growing hospitality industry was financing. They found that anti-Semitism was prevalent in the banking industry, and when they could obtain a loan, the interest rates were exorbitant. Again, they banded together to solve their common problem, and in the 1930s formed Cooperative Federal Credit Union, which made the much-needed loans to Jewish property owners, allowing their businesses to grow and flourish, and it too is still in business today. These two companies helped to jumpstart the hospitality industry in Sullivan County. Woodridge was home to numerous cooperatives and businesses that provided services to the Borscht Belt hospitality industry and was considered the roots of the hotel industry. Intercounty Farmers Cooperative provided feed to the local farmers and processed the eggs that they produced. Many boarding houses advertised their daily farm fresh eggs provided to their guests. There was also an airplane cooperative, dairy cooperative, and many others. The Steam Laundry, Gerson's Fruit Store, and Kessler's and Kagan's Butcher Stores also provided services to the many area hotels. Woodridge has seen a resurgence over the past several years as we welcome many second homeowners to our village. We are proud of our interesting history and the part this small village has played in the growth and history of the Borscht Belt. And now I'd like to introduce the founder of this wonderful project, Marissa Scheinfeld. Take that. Thank you
so much. Thank you, everyone, for being here. Really appreciate you coming out today to honor Woodridge. This is our 9th historic marker in a projected trail of 20. And when I think of Woodridge, I think of the beginning. It is one of the earliest dating Borscht Belt locations that saw an influx of Jewish vacationers, as Mayor said, in the early 1900s, in what was once then largely Jewish farm settlements. The 1920 edition of the New York-Ontario Railway Guidebook, called Summer Homes, depicts Woodridge as, quote, a small village in an agricultural district with fine views. Woodridge is not the glamorous, opulent, glittery moment so much of the Borscht Belt has become synonymous with, but instead one of the starting points for it all. Born from humble beginnings, the Borscht Belt developed out of the exclusion of Jews from many spaces across America. In a revolutionary act, the Jewish community decided to create their own space in the Catskills, which long has a history of being a refuge for many different minority groups. As the story goes, Jews come to the land, they find the farming, and the land is not conducive to farming, and many decide to take in boarders to supplement their income. Eventually, boarding becomes the sole enterprise, morphing small farmhouses into small hotels and bungalow colonies. The hamlet quickly flourished into a prosperous Jewish farming and resort community, and by the 1950s, more than 1 million people inhabited this summer world of hotels, bungalow colonies, and camps. During its heyday, Woodridge looked like most of the other combination farm and resort towns that dotted the county. However, a deeper dive into Woodridge finds the hamlet to be exceptionally unique. Once called a utopia in the Catskills, Woodridge was pioneering, it was innovative, and it was progressive. It had 5 food and insurance co-ops, as the mayor told us. It was also home to a place called the Kentucky Club, which was right in that building there. And the Kentucky Club was a cabaret and a restaurant. It was interracial, and it was a live music venue where frequent headliners named Givens and Sweetie often performed. In addition, the hamlet played host to an eclectic array of unpretentious hotels and bungalow colonies. Some notable destinations include the Vegetarian Hotel, a hotel that exclusively catered to vegetarians and the naturalist lifestyle, Sunny Oaks, a hotel known for its folk and swing dancing, and Grinefelder, a bungalow colony that was the summer home to the most concentrated group of Yiddish artists, musicians, and writers on earth during its day. And this is just a small mention of Woodridge's well of history. The Borscht Belt was a historical phenomenon, and there has never been a place like it in America. Woodridge's contributions to this era are nothing short of trailblazing, innovating, and enterprising. The Borscht Belt had a remarkable impact on Jewish culture, and it also injected a vitality into American popular culture, seen through the performers, entertainers, and artists who passed through this area and helped shape our nation's taste in music, theater, film, and arts. One person in particular who got his start here in Woodridge was Sid Caesar, right here at the Avon Lodge. Caesar rose to national fame with his friend Mel Brooks, whose epic career was launched just down the street in Hurleyville. The list of noteworthy individuals who can trace their journey to this place is an endless well. Having grown up in Sullivan County, the Borscht Belt is a story that I felt a deep internal drive to tell, and as has my partner Isaac Jeffries, who is my right-hand man on the Marker Project in all ways. With the physical era of the physical traces of the era vanishing, of which Isaac and I have extensively documented, our drive has become even greater to finish this project. We are thrilled to be dedicating a marker in Woodridge where it will keep the light of the Borscht Belt on. It is our hope that these markers ensure that that light never dims. Thank you to our partners who have been here every step of the way, the Jewish American Society for Historic Preservation, who funds every single one of our markers. Also, the Steingart family, whose images adorn many of our markers, the Catskills Institute, the Sullivan County Historical Society, Delaware Valley Artists Alliance, and special thank you to the town of Fallsburg and the hamlet of Woodridge. Especially grateful for Tommy Decker and his team at the Highway Department who installed the marker and set this all up. Huge thanks to Town Clerk Myra Bennett, who was instrumental in making this event come together. And deep thank you and gratitude to Mayor Collins. Mayor Collins reached out personally to ask for a marker for Woodridge. She is the only person who has done that. Everyone else is someone that we solicit and we say, hey, you want a marker? Yes, but Mayor Collins personally knew that the history was important, so thank you. And thank you all for joining us. We have pastries here from Fialkoff's, courtesy of the Goodstein family. The Goodstein family are...
Okay. Thank you. Hello, Woodridge, and all who came out to celebrate today with us. So, I love this little town, hamlet, whatever you want to call it. The reason I love Woodridge, I think, in the same way that I love Mountaindale, is that this town, in a way, is a living museum of itself. You go onto a corner, you'll see a piece of a pool, like down the road from here, there's literally half of a pool left over. That half of it was taken out of the ground, the other half was left over. I think it was from the Nassau Hotel. You'll go down the street and you'll see a little post or a little beam that used to have a sign under it. There's something, you know, that just feels like 1920s, 1910s Borscht Belt. Oh, sorry. Do I need to be speaking near this? Oh, okay.
Just stay centered.
Oh, stay centered. Okay. Thank you. But one of the reasons that I just love Woodridge is that it really does have that sort of eclectic Borscht Belt feel. Like Marissa said, it doesn't have your traditional Concord Resort Hotel or Grossinger's experience, but everything felt very real here. And whenever I look at the history here, it seems like there was such passion and the way that people would come up here, make this their home for the summer, and you can still feel it in the people that come up here. Woodridge is very much so alive, especially in the summer, and we all see this. So without further ado, I think it's time to unveil the marker. We just need somebody to walk over. 8, 7, 6, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. Beautiful. So the side that you guys are viewing right here is the Borscht Belt side. I'm going to read that second. On the other side, when you enter Woodridge, you're going to see a giant photo of Sunny Oaks, and I'm going to read the text to you guys right now so that we get it before you guys have to walk over. First incorporated in 1911 and known as Centerville, Woodridge had early roots as an agricultural community with farms and boarding houses. 8, 7, 6, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. Beautiful. So the side that you guys are viewing right here is the Borscht Belt side. I'm going to read that second. On the other side, when you enter Woodridge, you're going to see a giant photo of Sunny Oaks, and I'm going to read the text to you guys right now so that we get it before you guys have to walk over. First incorporated in 1911 and known as Centerville, Woodridge had early roots as an agricultural community with farms and boarding houses.
Hello. I am really sad not to be with you there today, but I'm really glad to have the opportunity to share some thoughts with you. I want to offer my congratulations to Marisa and the team for this wonderful project, and also to thank the Jewish American Society for Historic Preservation for funding this very visionary idea. My parents and I drove back and forth each year from Miami Beach to the mountains to work, and the historical markers were always an important element of the trip for me. So to see these markers memorializing the Catskills is such a treat. For many people, Woodridge is slightly off the beaten path of the best-known roads in Fallsburg and elsewhere. In fact, for me, I didn't see much of Woodridge when I grew up. It was not a place I spent much time, but when I started in the 1990s to work on the history of the Catskills, I found it to be a wonderful place, and I also found the very direct close connection to Greenfield Park in Ulster County, where I spent so many years. Woodridge had many hotels, but none of the big ones. And indeed, most of my years were spent with my parents, and later me, working in small hotels and a few medium-sized ones. So this is comfortable ground for me. It's interesting that we're right next to Glen Wild, where John Gerson's boarding house was the first Jewish resort in 1899. And of course, very important in the history of the Catskills were the 13 History of the Catskills conferences, which began for the first several years at Sunny Oaks Hotel, a very small, interesting place right nearby. Those 13 years of the conference provided a prompt to so much of the organizing, research, and preservation of the Catskills legacy. In Woodridge, we have the wonderful Yiddishist legacy of the Greenfield colony. We have the Avon Lodge, where Sid Caesar got his start. We have the very unique vegetarian hotel. In my research trips, I was so glad to see the renewal of the Hotel Israel as a private home, to see the lake house lasting a long time in its later Orthodox years as a marvel of architectural design. I loved going to the shul to see such a masterpiece of art. And I remember the steam laundry as not just serving the whole mountains for all of our waiters and busboys and chefs' outfits and sheets and towels for the hotels, but also the rare sight of union organizing. So Woodridge is a way to celebrate the small hotels, which were a rarity among the multitude of attention given to the large hotels. And another part of the wonderful marker project. Enjoy the rest of your day here and keep the mountains in your hearts.
Kosofsky, who founded the House of Joy, which became the Avon Lodge, along with Grinefelder Bungalow Colony. Thank you, Jay.
Thank you.
My grandparents, Jacob and Ethel Kosofsky, arrived in this country in 1906 from Russia. They had to live on the Lower East Side until they could escape. They were farm people from Russia, and in 1907, they made their way to Napanoch and then to Mountaindale, where my father was born in 1910, and then eventually to the banks of the Neversink River, where they had a farm. And as was mentioned earlier, people began to ask if they could sleep over there. So they took in roomers, and then eventually a small hotel was created. They had some partners to help in the hotel, Meyer Arkin and Ben Leshner, and that's the birth of a hotel called the House of Joy. And it truly was a house of joy. My father and his two sisters roamed freely. They were liberated kids from the city or anything like that. They were free as birds. And the House of Joy was very famous in New York City as a place to come for the summer. Good cooking. My grandmother did all of the cooking. And as I said, a house of joy. In 1936, my father got married, and my mother, who was a very educated woman and loved Shakespeare, said, I think we ought to change the name of the House of Joy. Why? Well, my father would come down to the train station to pick up guests, and he'd be yelling, House of Joy, House of Joy, and people were snickering and making remarks and so forth. So from the House of Joy came the Avon Lodge. A river flowed in front of the House of Joy. My mother loved Shakespeare, and she thought of him and the River Avon, and hence Avon Lodge. Also in 1936, a group from a colony in Mountaindale, Mirth Colony, approached my father and asked if he could build a colony for them. They were this progressive group, artists and musicians and actors, and they were dissatisfied with Mirth Colony. My father had all of this property, and he agreed to have a colony built. But the agreement was that they would run the colony. This group would do the individual renting. My father would just get a lump sum for the whole thing, and it was almost like a private country club, because people who came to it had to go through an interview process. And that's how the Grinefelder was born. Artists and musicians and the like. At the Avon Lodge, however, there were other activities. A famous Jewish boxer by the name of Bernie Friedkin trained there, and this would later be done at the Concord and the Grossingers, where boxers would come up and train. I was born in 1940, and my mother needed help. So she hired a young woman who was staying at the House of Joy, Avon Lodge, by the name of Florence Levy. Florence Levy was 18 years old, and she met a young man working in the casino, singing, by the name of Sid Caesar. And Florence Levy married Sid Caesar. So Mrs. Sid Caesar was my mother's helper, my governess, my nanny. And I can still see Sid Caesar coming into my father's barn to ask his advice about hunting and making dates with him to go deer hunting. It's just a remarkable period of time. I also remember my mother sending me up to the Grinefelder for Yiddish lessons, which I didn't want to have, but she sent me anyway. And one of the teachers was Mendel Elkin, who was one of the literary lights of the Grinefelder. And I still remember the first story he gave me and the words of it. And in Yiddish, Benny gehabt a bear, meaning Benny caught a bear. That's the only thing I remember from that particular lesson. Well, this is just a remarkable occasion. I'm so glad that my grandparents and parents and myself and my brother were able to be a part of it. But it's kind of interesting. My grandmother Ethel was a very practical woman, non-sentimental. She would be happy about this occasion, but she always had an expression in Yiddish, was gewen is nicht du. What was, is not now. But I'm glad to have been a part of it, and thank you, Marissa, for including me in this. Thank you.
Thank you so much. I'd like to invite up Alan Young. Alan grew up on his family farm called Young's Poultry Farm, located in Glen Wild. He has vivid memories of cracking open eggs to fill up gallon jars to sell to Woodridge businesses, such as Mortman's Bakery, including the one time when he dropped one of those gallon jars right here and watched the yellow runny eggs roll down the street. Alan is a graduate from Fallsburg High School. He is a Fulbright scholar. He is an author, an activist, and a pivotal figure in the gay liberation movement of the 1960s. Thank you, Alan, so much for being here.
Thank you, Marissa, for inviting me here. I appreciate it very much. Jay Kosofsky graduated from Fallsburg Central School 1 year before I did, so I've known him a long time. Probably some of the other people here I've known a long time, including my who's been with me for 44 years, thanks to the gay liberation movement that I was involved with. Now, my name is on that marker, which was quite a surprise to me, and I tried to think of it as an honor, although it seems a little strange. The other fellow's name is Louis Proyect. Now, Louis had a blog called The Unrepentant Marxist. I'm not sure why he was unrepentant, but that's what he called himself. And what I remember more than Louis, who I did know, he's deceased now, was his mother, Anne Proyect. Some of the people here may remember when she used to write the news column for Woodridge in the Monticello Evening News Weekly. And Anne's husband, Dave Proyect, ran a fruit and vegetable store, and he had the best pickles you would get anywhere. Jack Proyect? I made a mistake. We do make mistakes sometimes. Now, I actually worked in Green Acres, a hotel in Lake Huntington that was owned by the Rosenberg family. Now, the main person actor there was Esterita Blumberg, and her brother-in-law, Lou Blumberg, was the principal of the school that I attended just up the street, which is no longer there. And her brother, Bob Rosenberg, owned the Olympic Hotel, which was just a mile or so up the road. In Green Acres, I was a waiter in the children's dining room. And some of you may know that song, Zum Golly Golly Golly. So they sang, food waiter, 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 food waiter, waiter. So being a waiter in the children's dining room, that was quite a trip. But the farm work was my life, and I also worked for my uncle Leon Goldfarb, who lived with his family in Woodridge and had a farm services. And one of the things that Leon did was travel to Puerto Rico, and he met some Puerto Rican families and brought them up to Woodridge, and we had diversity. The American Labor Party, which is also mentioned on the marker, was an organization that Esterita Blumberg was active in. She, by the way, is the author of a book called Remember the Catskills. It's one of the best books about the Borscht Belt that you can read. It's very personal. And I think it's important to mention that the American Labor Party was very concerned about racism and worked with the black migratory workers that were in the steam laundry living in poor conditions, and they helped to improve the working conditions. And my family became very friendly with the Gilmore family. I don't know if Vincent Gilmore is here. I think he lives in Monticello now. I communicated with him on Facebook, and I said, did you know Rosakai Gilmore or Olin Gilmore? He said, yeah, Olin was my uncle, Rosakai was my father. And these were people that my parents socialized with. And Louis Proyect told me that there was gossip in town about, oh, there's black people and white people dancing together at the parties of the American Labor Party. And that was true. And it was part of the diversity that we brought to a community that needed diversity, to a society that needed diversity. And I became involved myself because as a boy, okay, 1958, that's the year I graduated from Fallsburg Central School. I suffered, I'm going to use the word suffered. I had a very hard time being a gay boy in a high school in Woodridge in 1958. And it wasn't until the gay liberation movement was launched in 1969 that I was able to come out along with many millions of other gay men and lesbians, bisexual and transgender people, and start to change our society in a positive direction around those issues. And we've made a lot of progress. And I'll tell you one thing. I just want to mention one more thing about the Jaffe family, because we were talking about co-ops. I forgot, I don't want to mention this. My father was very active in the Farmers Co-op, and Abe Jaffe, who was an outstanding farmer in Glenwild, he was on the board of the Fire Insurance Co-op. Anyway, getting back to diversity and the future, we've made so much progress in many ways in the society around diversity, including the diversity regarding gay people, that I want to just say one thing. We've made a lot of progress. There's some people that may want to take us back. We are not going back. So thank you very much.
Thank you, Alan. You know, a huge part of this project is empathy and compassion and acceptance and tolerance for all, particularly as where we stand was a place where the Jewish community had to create. They were forced to create this because they were excluded from elsewhere. We have two more speakers for you today. I would love to invite Bruce Kahnweiser up. He is a grandson of Fanny Schaefer and Abe Kahnweiser, who founded the Vegetarian Hotel circa 1920.
Hi, let me start by thanking Marissa and all those who helped organize today's event. It's a wonderful opportunity to bring us all back here to a place that has so many warm and wonderful memories for so many of, if not all of us. So, as my T-shirt gives away, I'm a vegetarian. I'm a third-generation vegetarian, and actually third generation from both sides of the family. Both my father and my mother, who's 97 and here with us today, were born and raised vegetarians. My brother Dan is also a third-generation vegetarian. He's here too, and easily recognizable by the same T-shirt. Anyway, so before there was the Concord Hotel, before there was the Raleigh Hotel, before there was the Browns Hotel, there was the Vegetarian Hotel. My grandparents, Fanny Schaefer and Abe Kahnweiser, were both born in 1890 in what today is the eastern Polish city of Białystok, which is where Bialys come from, by the way. But at the time they lived there, Białystok was part of Russia. Despite being born in the same city in the same year, and apparently even emigrating to the United States in the same year, 1905, they wouldn't meet until they both had resettled in New York City. And apparently they both, the story goes that they both frequented the same bakery, and the baker got to know his customers. And one day he said to my grandfather Abe, he said, "Abe, you know, there's this woman Fanny. She's got a lot of radical ideas like you. She's a vegetarian, and she's from Eastern Europe, and she's I think an atheist and maybe an anarchist too. Why don't you meet? You should meet her." And so the rest, as they say, is history. My grandfather Abe and my grandmother Fanny met and fell in love, and they wanted to also eventually escape the city. And they fell in love with the Catskill Mountains. I think it reminded them to some extent of Eastern Europe, and of course, like everyone else, it was so much. The climate was so much more beautiful because it was so much cooler in an era when there was no air conditioning and no escape from the oppressive summer heat. And eventually they bought a plot of land, perhaps it was no more than 5 acres on Silver Lake Road, about a mile from where we're sitting today. The property had a large house with 14 rooms. There was no indoor plumbing. Water came from a well. The bathrooms were outhouses. The only electricity was lights, and that apparently came from a generator. And how the generator got the electricity, I'm not really sure, but I remember my dad telling me how he remembers his father looking up at the evening the afternoon sun, the setting sun, and saying, oh, it's time to turn on the generator. I'm not sure, but I don't think my grandparents even set out to be hoteliers. I believe they moved to the country with the idea more of being farmers. They had a dairy cow, they had some chickens for eggs, but such a big house, it obviously made sense to rent out rooms to bring in some money. And so they did that, and relatives and friends and strangers were eager to get away from the city heat and spend some time in the mountains. But my grandmother didn't really like people cooking dead animals in her kitchen, and she said, well, how about if I cook for you? And I said, and I guess added a little nominal sum to that. And so she did. And what do you know? People loved it. And thus a boarding house became the vegetarian hotel. The 1920s are popularly known as the Roaring Twenties, and roar they did. The economy was white hot. People had money to spend, and they spent it. The hotel business was booming. By 1925, my grandparents were building a relatively massive three-story building that would become known as the main house. It had at least 18 rooms. My grandfather was a master carpenter. He wasn't big. He was only about 5'4", but it was said that he could put a nail into a 2x4 with 3 blows of a hammer. The ground floor of the main house had a large open room without any support beams, which initially served as both the dining room and an entertainment room. Over the ensuing decades, the hotel continued to grow. Other accommodations were the Long Bungalow, Sunny Acres, the Settee, the Deluxe, the Sorrento, Sorrento South, and finally the Bel Air, the only rooms at the hotel with their own private televisions. A casino was also built for nightly entertainment and afternoon folk dancing. By the time I arrived on the scene in the 1970s, the Vegetarian Hotel, or the Veg, as we affectionately called it, had a sleeping capacity of 164. And that large room that once served as both a dining room and an entertainment room was now exclusively a dining room, occupied with 24 tables of 8, making for a seating capacity of 192. The original main house had also been extended several times over the decades. The additions included a kitchen, which among other things included a walk-in refrigerator, a lobby with something of a grand staircase was added, as was a tea room, a front office, and finally an area for 2 public restrooms. Amenities were also in place. There was a solarium for nude sunbathing, a wonderful swimming pool, a tennis court, handball court, and shuffleboard courts. The property had also grown considerably to 100 acres, stretching from Silver Lake to deep into the woods above. Lake access meant there was also rowboating, and I guess the water must not have been deemed clean enough for swimming because I never knew anybody who swam in the lake, but boating certainly was a pleasure. Now, I grew up in North Jersey, and like so many others from the area in New York City, I needed to escape the oppressive summer heat. And when I was 11, I spent half a summer here, and for the following 10 summers, from 1977 to 1986, I worked at what we called the Veg. Not only was it a respite from the oppressive summer heat, but it was a window into a world far more colorful than vanilla suburbia. I mean, there were anarchists here, there were communists here, and not to take any positions on the people's beliefs, but the place was full of characters. There was a vibrancy to the summertime life here, and so it was basically, I guess, more, to wind it up, I suppose, is to say that, the great thing about it was that it was a great place to grow up. It was a great window into a broader world, whereas, not only were there eclectic people here, but you also saw the senior side of life. There were also, some of the summer help. There were real problems of alcoholism. Some of the people really, you saw the downtrodden people here too, people who life had really kind of passed by or were struggling to hold on by their fingernails because they were consumed by alcoholism or other substance abuse issues, which you totally did not see, or I did not see in white bread suburbia. It was a place where stuff happened in the summertime. You had the movie theaters in Woodburn and South Fallsburg. There were restaurants, and There was also the Monticello racetrack. I didn't go to too much, but that was popular. There was the chalet, and might have been at the Pines, I think, maybe. That was an entertainment, dance place, a bar, and it was just a whole world. It would just open my. Let me add that you had an opportunity to work. You know, I didn't go to camp. I worked summers, and so I learned responsibility. You learned to get up in the morning. You learned to, be at a job and do what you needed to do. And when I got to college, I found I was so much more ahead of my classmates in terms of responsibility. And that's pretty much what I had to say. Thank you all for listening. I hope you all have a nice day.
All right, and our last speaker is Julia Aronson. Julia is the daughter of Cynthia and Ted Aronson, whose family owned and operated Sunny Oaks for 4 generations. Thank you, Julia, for closing.
You're welcome. I will try to project. Okay. In 1928, my great-grandparents closed their candy store in Brooklyn and moved to the cozy hamlet of Woodridge, New York. Ida and Abraham Pendergrass, socialists and Jewish immigrants from Belarus, purchased 25 acres of land at the base of the forest a mile from Woodridge down Tabasinski Road. They wanted to farm the land, but to get through the Great Depression in 1929, they began to rent out rooms in their farmhouse. And by the 1940s, the farm had transformed into a small hotel that was called the Sun House. The Sun House was later passed to their youngest daughter, my grandma Faye, and her husband Miles. And my grandfather Miles was quite a visionary. He dug out the marshy field where the cows and the chickens had been, and he built a huge round dance hall on top of the hill with like chalet windows overlooking the lake. He painted a big sign on the tennis court near the lake. It said Sunny Oaks, a charming little hotel for 80 nice people. Interestingly, there was not one oak on the property, and there had actually been an oak tree blight in the region, but he felt that that would differentiate Sunny Oaks from the other small hotels, which often bragged about their sunny maples and their shady pines. In the heyday of the Borscht Belt, at 9 years old, my mother, who is sitting over here, Cynthia Aronson, was already making up beds and flipping pancakes as a short order cook. As a teenager, she tells me, she would hitchhike to Shawanga Lodge in her cha-cha shoes and dance to Tito Puente. She dated a lot of handsome waiters and busboys, and she is featured, actually, in the Sunny Oaks postcard in 1950, glamorously posing on the diving board. So what's over there is part of the postcard, but the other part is my mother very, very glamorously posing. After my grandfather died in 1970, my grandma Faye passed on the hotel to her and my father, Ted Aronson, who's also here today. The Borscht Belt era was in its decline, and many of the other small hotels around us were folding. But fortunately, we had the dance hall, and we also had a very vivacious, red-headed dance instructor called Sidell Singer, who had a huge following between Brooklyn and Manhattan and Florida, right? So our place was filled solid throughout the season, probably for the next 25 years or 30 years or so, right? And the great round dance hall was its heart and soul. Most of our guests folk danced around the clock, after breakfast, after lunch, and after dinner, and there was instruction all day long and into the night. And we had closets full of costumes, and folkloric dance music poured out of every crevice. Unlike the larger hotels in the region, we did not have big name talent, but we had weekly talent shows which featured incredibly talented family and friends who happened to be concert pianists and opera singers and masters of the Yiddish theater. So I just want to mention the Goldstein family, who were like the Jewish Von Trapps, and they were just 5 kids and everybody played an instrument, and they were like our best friends, and they did big concerts up here. So we want to remember them for sure, Jack and Harriet Goldstein and their children. In Woodridge here, we got our chickens from the Kessler brothers. We sent our sheets and towels to the huge industrial laundry right there. I brought my first Archie comic books and Casper, the Friendly Ghost comics, and chocolate egg creams and pretzels at Rashkin's Pharmacy, where the pizza place is now. The hotel of my childhood were my grandmother's friends. many of who had arrived in the 50s with their children, and they continued after their children had grown, so summer after summer until they became fixtures. They were a community of educators, artists, musicians. They were horticulturists, historians, cab drivers, survivors of World War II with numbers still on their arms. We even had fighters of the French resistance. Some came for over 50 years straight and stayed in the same cabin where there were no locks on the doors. They ate family style, they danced, they sang, they laughed, and they grew old together. As a hotel child, I also had 100 sets of Jewish grandparents who pinched my cheeks and watched over me lovingly while my parents ran the hotel 24/7 from Memorial to Labor Day. And in the late 90s, my brother and I helped to try to transition it to kind of a holistic retreat, and we were trying to blend the rest of our guests that were still there for 50-something years with a new clientele. And we were the first hotel to host the Catskill Conference under the direction of Phil Brown. We did it for several years, and we explored the history and the future of the Borscht Belt there. We closed our doors in the year 2000, but Sunny Oaks was one of the very last remaining small Borscht Belt hotels within the same family for 4 consecutive generations. And there are many stories to tell. And thank you so much, and I hope to tell them in another form at another time.
Thank you, Julia. Thank you all so much for joining us. This is our 9th in a projected trail of 20. We have 5 marker dedications set. Please follow us on social media and sign up for our mailing list. We have some promotional postcards here for you. And